Williams defends against copycats. Sierra beats Atari. And Holograms promise third dimension. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man.
What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to see what was making headlines in the computer and video game business 40, 30, and 20 years ago. On this episode, we will look back at the biggest stories from publications dated February of 1981. As always, a disclaimer, we are using magazine cover dates, so the events reported always happened a tad bit earlier. I'm your host, Carl, and as always, I'm here with my co-host, Peter. Say hi, Peter.
Hi.
Excellent. Okay. Now I can get out of the voice. So, Peter, let's get to the banter section. How are you?
The banter section. I'm fine, actually. I have a bit of a headache because of something we're going to talk about in just a second. Otherwise, jeez, really. Oh, jeez. HD. Now I know how it feels like. Other than that, I'm doing pretty fine. I mean, as we've talked earlier, I'm learning a lot while working. Mm-hmm. This is not something that everyone can say, and this is surely not something everyone wants to say.
You do know this is a podcast going out to people, and just saying something like this without any context makes no sense to them whatsoever.
This is true. I'm just, I just don't want to get started, man. And then we're just talking about this for another hour. It's just some legal stuff, legal construction stuff.
Don't talk about your job. Your job is not important here. We're not here to talk about work. We're here to relax, to break free. To find our inner space warrior.
And this is why we're torturing me with this space.
Okay,
thingy.
So to clarify for everybody out there, we've decided to introduce a new segment into the show before we go into our news roundup of yesteryear. And before we check in with Ethan to find out how we screwed up in the past, we're going to be doing a small little segment, which I thought would be fun because, well, Peter is a bit younger than I am and than many of our listeners, and he didn't experience a lot of these classic games that we're basically touching on in each episode. So we've decided to force Peter. Well, Peter's agreed to this, so I guess it's not forcing, it's just masochism at this point. And he's going to be testing out at least one game every episode that was reviewed in a publication that we're covering in that episode. So from a February 1981 issue of Replay magazine, we're going to be looking today at, or better said, Peter has just played the game Astro Blaster, an arcade space shoot-'em-up from Sega from 1981. Now, the interesting thing here is the only rule was that he has to play the game for at least 7 minutes. So that gives us the wonderful title for this segment that we're calling Peter's 7 Minutes in Heaven. Mm-hmm. So, Peter, tell us about your experience playing Astro Blaster.
Well, it truly was an experience, man. First of all, now I really understand why you guys are as stress-resistant as your generation tends to be. Jesus. It's almost like they want you to fail.
So let's start off. Give us a brief description of what you experienced in the game.
Yes, what did I experience in the game? After we got it started successfully, and I admire our team efforts in order to accomplish that.
Team viewer of me logging on to fix your computer. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's basically a space shooter. You are in control of a spaceship, and there are invaders like alien spaceships coming towards you, and you shoot them, and they're shooting back at you. And this all happens in a speed which is just not suited for me after 9 p.m.
I'm
but
so
actually
looking forward. Sorry, there's a couple of games coming down the pipeline. I know I'm going to be giving those to you. Wait until we get to Robotron 2084. Oh, that's going to be fun.
Looking forward to it. Going. And we have to record this podcast surely around noon, but not in the evening. Anyhow, so... what did I say? You basically shoot up those spaceships, and they try to shoot you, and they're moving in patterns more or less randomly. And I mean, the graphics are pretty well for the time.
Yeah, it's very impressive, actually.
Yeah, it's really impressive, and also the sound effects. I mean, they are part of what gave me a headache. And I try to imagine kids back in the day standing in an arcade, and they're listening to this thing, and next to them is a cabinet shouting other stuff, and next to them is another cabinet shouting other stuff, and the room is full of cabinets shouting stuff. So I think the sound in those arcades surely was amazing.
Oh, it was. There's really no way to describe it to somebody who hasn't experienced it, but full arcade full of kids all playing games, loud beeps, bloops, booms. It's just, there's an energy in that room that is simply, you cannot replicate.
Yes.
And you're why would you want to?
Exactly. When you can play at home, avoiding other people. Anyhow,
damn introverts.
Anyhow, so you shoot stuff shoots at you, and you try to get through the level. First of all, I experienced that there's a lot of convenient stuff missing. Like after each 3 waves of enemies, you get to refuel, and you actually have to steer your ship into the refueling ship so that you don't blow up. And this is a mistake I made when the first time the thing wanted to refuel me. And I think those developers did this purposely, so that you can lose another quarter because you just didn't know. So I made the rookie mistake. I'm proud of it. Will I repeat it? Surely. Yes, but
how did you deal with the overheating of the guns?
Yes, this is actually a problem, because the more you shoot, the more your gun gets hot, and eventually it overheats, so you can't shoot anymore. Luckily, I wasn't in a position to have my gun overheated, because I was killed always before that happened.
Wow. You sucked that hard at this, huh?
I sucked that hard, man. Yeah, I sucked that hard. Dude, I am the spoon-fed generation, you know?
Yeah. Your game's basically, we can't let you get hurt. That would be terrible. Yeah, yes. Okay, I understand. So okay.
And the games nowadays don't need you to lose every second, so you pop in more quarters. They want to rip us off differently with microtransactions and pay $60 for a game and still pay for microtransactions. So,
hey, come on! This was the ultimate original microtransaction.
Exactly.
25 cents at a time.
This is what I was about to say. So You can't even call that free to play. Jeez.
No. It's they charge you the 25 cents before they let you play. There's no, first taste is free type of stuff.
Exactly. So, but still, will I play it again? I don't think so. Just because it's, I don't know. I just don't have the nostalgia factor, if you know what I mean.
I understand.
For me, it is just stressful. But now that I talk about it, I really want to beat the thing. How long is it?
I honestly don't know. I've never played it for more than a few minutes, so
yeah.
It's not a game that I remember seeing in the arcades back in the day. I knew of it, but I never really played it. It's also a little bit before my time. I would have been 4 years old when this game came out. So
okay, so you haven't seen it.
I knew of it. I saw a couple of cabinets, old cabinets at not bars, but it's the kind of thing that would end up in the back room at a pizza parlor, 3 years after it was hot or something. But it wasn't a game that was really on my radar. It doesn't make a huge lasting impact on the industry, but it was very indicative of the type of gameplay that you're getting at this point. It's sort of the next evolution of the Space Invaders concept, now with the fuel running out, the gun overheating, a lot more elements to keep track of, and the graphics are very, very competently done with some nice color choices. So,
I mean, the background is basically just black. But the ships are nice and flashy. Other than your ship, they are basically just like shapes being thrown at you at an enormous speed. And by the way, did I mention that they shoot while shooting at you, shooting themselves at you? This is just. I mean, there's just so much stuff moving. I couldn't focus on. I mean, as soon as I focus on the ships moving towards me, I forgot the missiles running towards me. So, yeah.
Well, like I said, I am so looking forward to Robotron now. Oh, this is going to be so much fun. Sorry, I'm really proud of this idea because this is awesome.
Yes, okay, it is. It's actually fun, but I'm just realizing maybe I'm getting too old for this stuff.
Damn kids. Okay, cool. So that was our initial segment of Peter's 7 Minutes in Heaven. And hopefully we'll be able to keep doing this every week, going through the decades and having you experience both the good, the bad, and the ugly of video games.
Yeah.
Okay.
And now I understand why all those girls got a headache when they were being condemned to be in heaven with me. Anyhow, want to move on?
I don't even know what to say to that. Yeah, let's move on. Okay, so before we can do any kind of jumping, we need to check in with our good friend Ethan to find out what we got wrong on a little segment we like to call the Department of Corrections.
Welcome back, Ethan. So let's talk about everything that went wrong in our January 1981 jump.
Well, welcome back to a new year, the twisted knot of corrections, weaving through the ages and coming directly back to you, Carl. Anyways, so first of all, we have the Peter comment. I still haven't made a sound effect for that. Maybe I should. But you got totally owned when Carl was talking about, or when Peter was talking about Doug Bowser, and you were like, "What? What are you talking about?" Yeah. So.
Yeah. That's the sad fact that I'm not doing virtually any modern gaming, and I completely forgot that the guy's name was Bowser. How that even slipped my mind, I have no idea.
Yeah. And now on to correcting myself, the corrections, just as the redundancy department of redundancy. The last time I talked about the Atari deal, and I said it was 28 million in cash. That's not true. Most of it was debentures, but there was a large amount of cash. I got corrected on that by Alex, so thank you, Alex.
Alex. So the even higher authority.
Yeah. He wrote the book on early video games, literally. So he gets to claim a little bit of primacy on stuff.
And just like every listener out there, he is a Patreon supporter of this show. So,
of course, and so am I. So I get to feel the moral superiority just the same, Carl. Well, thank you very much.
I know, but he has more listeners than you do, so I'm kind of trying to piggyback on that.
Oh, boy. The grand game of market politics. Anyways. All right, on to the plethora of things to get through for January of 1981. Okay, so first of all, you said Sanders and Associates. It is Sanders Associates. This always happens to be a problem. I don't know why that just everyone assumes it's something and Associates every time this comes up. But
because it's grammatically nonsense to say Sanders Associates without an apostrophe after the R in Sanders.
No, but Royden Sanders was the guy.
Yeah, but Sanders Associates, so he's not involved, it's just his associates? Grammatically, this makes no sense. It should be Sanders and Associates. But just saying Sanders Associates is a nonsense phrase.
Anyways, on to the next part.
I'm an English teacher, okay? That's kind of what I do nowadays.
Oh, geez. Oh, don't get me started on English teachers. All right, next thing is you're talking about how Commodore, when they made the VIC-20, one of their big things was trying to consolidate chips and having less chips so they didn't have to manufacture. And you said that they were like one of the first to do that, and, you know, in a broad sense they were, but Atari also consolidated a lot of stuff onto their Antic and Pokey chips as well.
Yeah, and I misspoke there. What I meant to say was that while Atari did it basically to create these brand new, really cool graphic and sound chips, Commodore is doing it primarily just as a cost-cutting measure.
Well, the Pokey does I.O. too.
Yeah, Pokey also does I.O., yes. Well, but the whole idea in the Atari chips was they were doing a whole bunch of stuff in those chips that nobody had ever done before, like hardware sprites and so forth. The VIC-20 is just basically, we're doing it this way because it's going to be cheaper. We can hit our price point if we do it this way. I think if they had been able to do it cheaper with standard off-the-shelf parts, Trammell would have done it that way. But the fact that he had MOS technologies, it was so much easier.
Trammell didn't know anything about technology. He's just like, is it cheaper? Then yeah, go ahead and do it. I mean, I think that this is a broader thing, but I think the thing about Jack just wanting things cheap is overblown. If he just wanted things cheap, he would have gone the full Sinclair route. But he did want things with some capability.
Well, I think it was that, plus, unlike Sinclair, Trammell was a much better marketer, and he wasn't going to put something out on the market, well, at least in the early stages, something out on the market that was going to feel cheap. His machines never, I mean, granted, the keyboard on the PET could be argued to have felt cheap, but by the time you get to the VIC-20 with the Apples and the Atari computers out there, I think he was smart enough to realize that anything less than a full mechanical keyboard just wasn't going to be seen as value for money on the market.
But that's all a side thing. The idea of the chip companies controlled by Commodore, because I don't think MOS was the only one. Trying to, to minimize the chips in order to minimize manufacturer failure rates and all that. I think that's a fair point.
Yeah, Yeah, and there's a great quote. I can't remember which of the Trammell sons. I know it wasn't Sam, but one of the Trammell sons was probably. And he said, yeah, it was a wonderful thing where if they had an idea, send it over, and in almost no time, the chip factory could basically produce a prototype for you. And that was probably one of their biggest advantages at this point. But, yeah. Okay. Yes, you were correct. I should have cleared that up, and I knew better. It's terrible.
Anyways. So next one's from Alex. He noticed this because apparently I did not. You were mentioning that the coin-op market doesn't have the same problems as other industries because in terms of cheap Japanese imports. The American manufacturer is not facing the same threat of cheaper Japanese product coming over as opposed to other types of entertainment industries, because if you want the hit game, you have to go through the manufacturer. But as you talk about, like in your 1990s jumps, the continuing Red Baron case, this was a factor in the 80s too. It wasn't as big of a factor, but parallel importing was a problem. There is quite a few court cases over it. And I'm sure you'll cover some of those as they come up. There's ones about Defender and Galaxian and all those big hit games. So don't entirely discount the parallel import problem in the 80s.
No, and I don't, because I've actually we've talked about the parallel imports several times in an upcoming interview with Jim Trucano, the former AMOA. No, actually, with him we didn't discuss. That's an excellent one, but we didn't discuss that very much. But I actually just finished an interview with Kevin Hayes of Atari and Namco. It was at Atari Ireland. He was the guy running that show in the early days.
Well, technically not running it.
Yeah. Well, he was the bookkeeper. Yeah. But the deal with it is that we actually went pretty deep into that whole parallel board thing and how they looked at it from a bookkeeping and a business standpoint, which is quite interesting. Don't want to spoil that. It'll be coming out for the patrons probably in 3 months. Unfortunately, it's going to be a little while yet, but I got a big backload. Okay?
I know.
There's a lot of interviews sitting on my hard drive. So
this is what you need to advertise, Carl. You need to advertise. You got all this stuff in the.
I've got this stuff on my hard drive. Yeah, no. We've got the schedule of one interview a month, one interview episode a month, set for at least the next 6 or 7 months. I mean, it's pretty deep. Our bench is pretty deep right now. But the interesting thing here was that I guess what I was trying to say, and I did not express it properly, especially if Alex pointed it out. What I really meant to say was knockoff products, as opposed to copies of the same game, but this idea of producing a similar product cheaper wasn't going to be as big of a deal because the hit game was the hit game. Okay. And that was what I was trying to get at. I didn't do it properly. So yeah, it's not like calculators where, all the calculators are the same. You either have Defender or you don't have Defender. That's kind of what I meant.
Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. So on to the next one. This one's going to be a little touchy, I think, for a certain set of people, especially because recently, just because Chris Crawford has been kind of, in the vague sense of having news in the retro gaming scene. Recently, Richard Moss, The Life and Times of Video Games, put out something about the Dragon Speech by Chris Crawford and all that. Crawford has always made the claim that he is the sole co-founder of the CGDC. That does not appear to actually be the case, or the sole founder, rather, of CGDC.
Ah, okay. So who are his co-founders?
It's kind of complicated. There were the people who were there at first. There was two, I talked to this guy named Jeff Johanigman, who was a producer at Origin. And he says that he doesn't consider the first CGDC to be that famous one where they all go to Chris Crawford's house and sit around and talk about stuff. Because there's no itinerary. There was, it was just kind of an invitee, let's sit around and talk about stuff. So when it was eventually founded, when it became an organization, is when you can say something was actually founded, which was the following year. And I don't know who specifically was on the name bracket of it, but I know that Chris Crawford was not the only one filing the papers. That's all.
Gotcha. Certain. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, and I'm sure Crawford considers that first meeting at his house to be the first one, but it probably didn't have the name or anything at that point. So
yeah, I can't remember exactly what the layout of that is. I didn't, admittedly, did not look into it, but just the main point, he is the co-founder of CGDC.
Gotcha. Okay, makes sense.
Next one is a dating one. This is a very common one on the internet. You talk about Akalabeth, and I think you said it was 1979, but it is 1980 based on all available evidence.
Gotcha. Okay.
Evidence including the Ziploc baggy printout that Garriott made, and it says 1980 on it.
Well, I'm going to go with that being an accurate statement then. So, yeah, okay, then 1980. Yep.
Yeah, it doesn't get advertised until 1981, but there appears to be evidence that it was being sold a little bit before then, but not a whole year before then.
Gotcha.
Next one is a game description thing. When you're talking about adventure, and it's fun to rag on the ducks and all that, but you said everything was a block. They're blocky. They're not blocks. There's a sword. There's a chalice.
Right. But the player is a block.
Yes, the player is a block.
And the walls are just blocks.
They're rectangles. Blocks are different.
Okay, there are a bunch of blocks on top of each other. Okay, no, point well taken. You are correct. There are items to pick up that your block can pick up.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. No, that was an oversimplification on my part that I should know better than to make.
A couple more adventure things. All right, you were talking about Robinette in the Thing of Adventure, if he got in trouble for the Easter egg or whatnot, but he left before the game was even released, knowing that, it was going to be discovered at some point. So he was glad when somebody finally did. A man named Adam Clayton, who later became a video game programmer.
Oh, really? Okay, I did not know that. Anything I know him from?
He worked at Sculptured Software. He was a programmer and artist on the SNES port of the first Mortal Kombat, and he did programming on a couple of subsequent ports. And I'm not sure about today, but very recently he was working at Avalanche Studios.
Damn, good career right there. Even if the Super NES ports of Mortal Kombat aren't the best, but hey, did the best he could with the hardware he was given.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And it had an actual controller.
An actual controller, as opposed to that 3-button monstrosity that was the Genesis controller?
Yes.
Very true. Oh, come on, but you could play Street Fighter on that and press the start button to switch between kicks and punches. Totally an effective way of playing a fighting game.
What tragedy for the people of the past.
Hey, I played Mortal Kombat on an Amiga, okay? With one button.
One button, yeah.
Okay. Now, all the moves were there. You just had to keep moving the joystick in the right direction and keep pushing the button for everything.
Sounds fun.
It's a great
Okay,
book.
Final thing about adventure. You talked about that the Atari adventure game is where the name of the genre comes from, but actually it's far more attuned to the original mainframe game. This is kind of a weird thing to kind of suss out, but adventure on the 2600 didn't sell like huge numbers. It's kind of the Velvet Underground of of games. Like everybody who played it became a game developer, and that's not literally true, but it's common enough. It probably sold decently, but it did not have the seismic impact by itself. You needed the text adventures from the computer side to come in, and then there was this kind of correlation, and then we have this thing called action adventure, which is a stupid genre term, but we have to go with it for right now.
Gotcha. Okay. And that makes a lot more sense than what I was babbling on about. Is that all I got wrong this month?
Maybe not, but we'll just move on. Go back to the episode, Carl.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the episode. There's no doubt going to be a million things for you to bitch about next month. I mean, correct me on next month. Okay, Ethan, see you next time.
Peace.
This is where we complete each other.
How so?
Well, you mess up all the old stuff and I get the new stuff right. Not bad for a podcast going back several years.
A broken clock is right once a day. Twice, actually. Sorry. Ugh.
See?
It's way too late to do this. Okay. Before we turn on the time machine, of course, we have to plug all of the wonderful places where you can get a hold of us. And we're on the Twitters, and there's an Instagram account that I haven't updated in forever since they blocked the backdoor to be able to do it on a browser. And you can send us you can send us comments or questions at our email address, videogamenewsroomtimemachine@gmail.com. You can also back us on Patreon. We've got a bunch of interview episodes that go up early there, up to 3 months before they hit the regular feed. So you can listen to the entire mega interview with co-founder of Acclaim, Gregory Fischbach, is up there right now. And that's all the links to that stuff are down in the show notes. Anything I'm forgetting before we turn on the time machine, Peter?
Well, I think you're forgetting that if there's someone out there who wants to send over $1,000 a month, you will all get surround sound. So one guy has to do the move, and the rest can profit out of him.
Yeah, we'll definitely record surround sound. I don't even know how we do that, but hey, if somebody's throwing $1,000 in, I'll find a way. So yes, let's do that. Okay.
Exactly.
Let's turn on the time machine and head back to February of 1981.
Rapidly becoming an international craze. 1981.
This is only the first step in newspapers by computer.
Right in the midst of it, thank you.
Welcome to February of 1981. Peter, what's our first story?
Our first story of 1981, Defenders Defended. William defends its rights to Defender.
Replay magazine reports that Mike Stroll, president of Williams Electronics, succeeded in getting a copycat of Defender by French game maker Joutel removed from the floor of the London ATE show. The game, Defenders, with an apostrophe, was, according to Stroll, a blatant ripoff of the game with a square box on screen where the Williams name would normally be seen.
So they ripped off Defender and called it Defenders?
Yeah, basically.
They were that lazy.
That lazy, yes. I mean, apparently this game, I couldn't find a copy of it anywhere. Now, Joutel did make some other games, but I couldn't find a copy of it. But from the description, it looks like it's a straight ROM hack, where they just got a copy of the ROM, and this is why there was a black box on screen where the Williams logo normally would be.
Okay. So they really were that lazy. And they didn't even switch out the colors or changed it in any way?
I didn't see any description of any major changes other than the cosmetic changes to the title screen. Doesn't mean that there weren't some additional changes inside the game. But, as far as I can tell from the way this article was written and the fact that they actually got they got it pulled from the floor of the show, and that I could not find any images or anything of this cabinet online. Pretty much that's probably what it was. Yeah, I mean, and this is not an uncommon situation at this time. So there were a lot of copycats, a lot of ROM hacks. This was also the reason why Atari started to do a lot more with vector graphics games, because the screens that they were using for those were not as easily reproducible, or it weren't as easy to obtain. So, yeah, this is just one of those situations where, quite honestly, this company tried to pull a fast one.
Yeah, maybe they were too fast. You know, do you remember the case of Data East versus, what was their name?
Epics.
Epics, thank you. The fighting game where they basically just switched out the colors. And
well,
it was fine. It was fine. So defenders with an apostrophe, they just switched out the colors and called it not defenders, but attackers, and they would have been fine.
Now, the difference was that Data East's game Karate Champ was basically just replicating one-on-one karate fighting. And so the question now is, well, you don't own the rights to karate fighting.
No.
Karate fighting has existed for a long time. Data East did not invent those mechanics.
No.
A game like Defender, and you haven't played Defender, so, correct?
Yes.
Okay, Defender is, especially at that time, extremely unique game. Number one, it's not the first game with scrolling, but it's the first real shooter with a scrolling background. It has this entire additional tactical element where there's these aliens coming down and they're picking up human beings that are on the ground, these little human figures, and then carrying them to the top of the screen. And if they hit the top of the screen, they merge with them. Mm-hmm. So you have now a very unique and original idea for a game mechanic, which hadn't been done before. And that idea would, even under the Data East Epics logic, court logic, would hold up in court. Now, at this point in time, well, of course, because nobody had really done that game mechanic before. Now, you could probably do that storyline with other mechanics, but nobody had done it in a game before. That's going to be a protectable concept under that Data East case. Now, remember, that Data East case is still almost 10 years away.
Yep.
So we have a lot of other cases, including one on this episode. Actually, it's the next story, where we're going to find out that the current state of the law is not that sophisticated yet.
Okay. Getting the clue and moving on. Atari loses preliminary injunction against Online Systems Jawbreaker.
The legal war over copyright protection of games has moved from the arcades to the home, as Online Systems Jawbreaker has caught the eye of Atari, official license holder of home ports of Pac-Man. Ultimately, Online Systems, the company that would eventually become Sierra, would prevail, but Ken Williams would give an ominous prediction of what his victory might lead to.
So what was his prediction?
He said that while he thought Jawbreaker was protectable, he did say it would be a bad thing if this decision led to other people being able to copy his games. And Jawbreaker, and we'll have a link to it in the show notes, is basically just a straight up ripoff of Pac-Man. There's really no way of saying that it's not a Pac-Man ripoff.
Okay, and Ken Williams was like, oh geez, we won.
Famously, you get the feeling, if you read his book, and I think we even talk about it briefly on the interview I did with him, you get this feeling that he kind of knew that this was a bad idea, to allow this kind of copyright violation.
Atari surely wasn't happy about that.
Oh, under no circumstances. They paid a lot of money for the Pac-Man license. They had a lot riding on the release of Pac-Man for the 2600. They thought it was going to be their next Space Invaders, and in many ways it was. But in many ways it wasn't. And so the problem really is that everybody wanted a version of Pac-Man. Just like everybody wanted a version of Defender, everybody wanted a version of Space Invaders. And while releasing those for consoles meant, they were being done by the console holders or some third party like Activision. But on home computers, it just meant any kid who could figure out how to do it on the computer could suddenly make it and sell it. Yeah. And this is why the computer game makers are going to be the first ones in the sites and the first ones getting product out.
Mm-hmm. So compared to Pac-Man, back in the day, how successful was Jawbreaker?
I wouldn't know how successful the sales were. I'm sure that it sold fairly well for Sierra. Obviously, it's no Pac-Man because the computer market is much, much smaller at this point. Yeah. And there's also piracy. So even though Sierra, it probably got a lot of sales out of it, and they ported it to a bunch of different systems, and the ports were also a little bit different each one. Yeah. At the end of the day, what's happening with the game is that, the majority of the people playing it probably didn't pay for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and Atari being pissed off of losing this lawsuit warns developers against copycats.
Atari has taken out a full-page ad in Softside magazine, warning developers to stop releasing games that plagiarize their titles, such as Asteroids and Missile Command. They do say that they are offering limited licensing opportunities to those that contact their patent lawyers. At the same time, in Soft Talk, Muse's game ABM is reviewed curiously without a single mention of the existence of the game Missile Command. Silas Warner is actually praised for making a very innovative and creative game. And yes, ABM was just a straight-up knockoff of Missile Command.
I'm wondering how about the credibility of the threat made by Atari due to losing the lawsuit against Online.
Well, you have to remember these things are sort of happening at the same time. Yeah. So they aren't just going to give up. And even though they've lost the Jawbreaker one, the last thing they can do is simply say, okay, none of it means anything. They're going to have to keep fighting. Also remember, Atari at this point is a division of Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers is depending at an ever-increasing way off of Atari. So they have a massive power behind them that can pay for really good lawyers and everything else. Okay. A company like Sierra is basically a bunch of, I don't want to call them hippies, but it's a bunch of computer geeks up in the mountains. There isn't a huge corporation here yet.
Right. But they're well hidden and you can't get them.
Well, they're not that well hidden. They've got addresses so people can order the product. So it really is one of those situations. And Muse Software, I mean, we talked to Ed Zarin. There's an interview, our interview with him about this. He's also it's him, Silas Warner, and the occasional other person coming in or sending him a product. And they're just making games essentially out of their house. So it's not like this is a big industry. These are not people with a lot of money. It's a whole different level of business.
Okay.
Between a company like Atari and a company like Muse Software. But the interesting thing here is, and just going through the pages of this magazine, it's like, here's the Atari ad. Then a couple pages later, it's like this review, this in the magazine of this great new game, and it really reads like the guy who's reviewing the game has never heard of Missile Command, because he's talking about how this game is so innovative and, oh, the game mechanic is so cool and it's this great evolution of Space Invaders. And you're like, dude, it's just Missile Command. And
do you think there's a slight chance of this reviewer never having played Missile Command?
Extremely high. And
okay.
But that's probably what happened. He just hadn't played Missile Command, which was a fairly new game at this point. I mean, probably out for less than 6 months, which then, of course, means Silas Warner, amazing programmer, legendary programmer. He probably popped it out, in a week or two. And so suddenly you've got this game that is simulating or reproducing a game from the arcades that this reviewer just hasn't even seen yet, but already the version that they know is this version by this on the computer. And there's an interesting commentary also in the Softside magazine by Scott Adams.
Mm-hmm.
And Scott Adams is the founder of Adventure International, the first company to really make text adventures for home computers. He's a very, very big deal at this point. I mean, he's also starting to publish other people's games and doing distribution for a bunch of other companies. Mm-hmm. And he writes a commentary in this same issue of Softside. Actually, basically the next page, the page adjacent to the review, where he talks about Atari's approach to protecting assets and the importance of protecting this intellectual property of the game design. And there's a link to it in the show notes. It's definitely worth reading to see that not only is it totally unclear at this point in time how this is going to end up getting managed. Nobody really knows what is going to be a protectable ID and what isn't. But at the same time, everybody realizes we have to do something. We have to have some kind of approach.
Yeah. Well, it's no fun if you spend all your money and time on R&D and the development of a new idea, and then someone just comes around the corner and says, good that you've made the work, and now I'll just rip it off.
Exactly. And these companies are starting to get more and more professional, as we will also see another story today. But yeah, it's a very, very new industry. Nobody's ever had to deal with this stuff before in an interactive medium. And yeah, it's just going to be a free-for-all for a little bit still.
Okay. While other people are still thinking who to rip off, Mattel introduces the Discovery System.
In the run-up to Toy Fair, Mattel introduces their children's Discovery System, a small integrated computer with 2K of memory.
That's a lot.
Considering that this is a toy, or it's being sold as a toy, yeah, it's not a tremendous amount, and this is going to be one of the big weaknesses. I hadn't heard of this before. I did a bit of a deep dive on it. Mm-hmm. There's some links to video of it in the show notes. What this was is a keyboard and a tiny little LCD display. And it is an LCD display that's using pixels, so it's not your typical normal display where it's the letter 8, the number 8 that just gets reshuffled to do the different letters. And it's got a little, when you boot it up, it's got this little Running Man animation that goes across the screen. And I think you can only have 1 or 2 lines of text on this tiny little display. But it came with these software cartridges. It had different overlays for the keyboard, and you could do some rudimentary programming on it to create your own applications. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know exactly how they got stored or what the deal was. It's basically a very, very limited system. ends up running about, I want to say, $150 that Christmas. So it probably debuted a little bit higher, but it is one of those items where it's a good idea had the Atari 2600 not already been cost reduced at that point. Mm-hmm. Sorry, yes, it's $99.99 at Christmas, and the modules are each $16.99.
So, would I be happy as a kid if I get this thing?
Probably not. I mean, it's designed as a learning tool. So you're not going to be playing any fun, cool stuff. It's more like, ooh, it's got a calculator module, or ooh, I can play around with, geography lessons or something like that.
So the thing asks you something and you just typed in the answer.
Basically, yeah. And so this is why it's a very limited system. Very limited.
Especially no need to talk to your parents' device. Okay.
Well, I mean, it was seen as an instructional tool. Little Timmy's first computer, and for $99, I mean, granted, $99 in 1980, one is more like $350 today, but still, it was a beginning computer. It's still a fraction. I mean, when you consider at the time they're announcing this at Toy Fair, even the most basic Atari 400 model is going to be 4 or 5 times as much.
Yeah.
And granted, by the time Christmas 1981 comes around, there's going to be something else on the market that's closer to the $99 price tag for a computer. But we're going to get there when we get there. Yeah. And at this point, I mean, the Atari 2600 in that same Christmas catalog is, I think, selling for like $50 or $60. Right. So that becomes a tougher sell.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I remember that when I was a kid. No. When my sister was a kid, well, I was a kid back then as well. But when we were kids, my sister got a learning computer from my uncle, and I think we even had some fun with it because there were some games on that thing. But no, we really enjoyed those little games, but we just didn't use it for what it was meant to be used.
Well, I mean, you can have fun with almost anything. I mean, kids just, will play with anything at the end of the day. It's just a question of, was the thing that you were playing with, useful? Was it going to get you beyond the first 10 minutes of entertainment? And that's really the kicker here, because if the system is really so limited, you're going to run into that, okay, now I've done this, what do I do next problem.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that that's where a system like this was going to fall flat on its face.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Reminds me of Astro Blaster.
Well, there it's not the system that was falling flat on its face. It was you falling flat on your face. And no, I stand corrected. The VCS was going for $147. So the Discovery system was a little bit cheaper than the 2600, but only by $47. And I think that if you could buy a VCS for an extra $50, you were probably going to buy a VCS for an extra $50.
Well, depends. If you want to give it to your kid, then maybe not.
Well, yeah. If you were one of those parents that cared about their education.
Okay. Star Trek fans rejoice. Atari announces hologram system.
Gaming looks to be entering the third dimension with Atari's Cosmos, the first holographic game system. The system, which is advertised to be a cartridge-based tabletop system, is just a hard-coded red LED-powered game system that, similar to the Odyssey, switches between variants through a plug-in card that also includes a holographic dual image that becomes a backdrop for the game and has no other effect on gameplay. The system would get pretty poor reviews at Toy Fair and be canceled before getting to market.
I don't get the concept of this holographic dual image thing. So how does it work? Or how does it look like?
I haven't been able to find any footage of the actual complete system, but a few people have found copies of the holograms. So from the descriptions that I've been able to find, what this thing is a little tabletop system. So it's too big to be a handheld. Yeah. You don't have an LED screen like with the Discovery system. Instead, what you have is the bunch of red LEDs. Remember, this is before blue LEDs have been discovered or been created. Mm-hmm. So red was the most common LED color, similar to the other handheld LED games of the day. Okay. And you would then put this cartridge in, and the cartridge was this hologram picture. You know, those ones where if you tilt it the right way, it changes picture.
One of those. Okay.
Well, not the ones that have little prisms. This was hologram, so it still looks like a 3D image, but if you tilt it, you also get a second 3D image. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the idea here was going to be that you're playing this game, and it was just going to be little red lights dotting back and forth. So like there was a Superman game where the first picture was supposed to be Metropolis, the city. Okay. So presumably you'd have a dot that represents Superman, dots that represent something attacking the city, and you're shooting them down or whatever.
With dots?
With dots. Wow. And then the second image was Superman punching somebody. Mm-hmm. So that would be the extent of the gameplay is, these dots doing things. And just like with the Odyssey, these were not going to be programmable ROM cartridges. They were just going to be switching interrupts so that you would have a limited number of variations of the same game logic.
Okay.
But given that you only had so many dots on the screen, it probably didn't matter.
Yeah, I'm out.
Yeah, exactly. This was basically an idea that may have had market capability in like 78, 79. But by 1981, no, people have already gone way, way past this. Mm-hmm. There's no way that this is going to go anyplace. Atari had put in a lot of R&D on this. They had this whole holographic lab thing going on, and it just was a dead end as far as the technology was concerned, because the era of having still images in the background of games, which was a big thing in the early arcades, like Space Invaders, for example. The original game is black and white, but what they would do is they had the screen positioned in the cabinet in such a way that you weren't actually looking at the screen. The screen was being reflected onto another surface that had this picture of this moon on it. So it looked like the bases you were protecting in Space Invaders were actually on this moon. Yeah. And that kind of, assist for weak graphics was dying out. Like you said, with Astro Blaster, I mean, there's some nice colors. The ship is well defined. You don't need non-digital artwork to pep up the game anymore. Yeah, it's actually going to hold you back because then you're stuck with the one scenario.
I mean, but this surely explains why later on Atari would just research and develop stuff and then not publish it.
Well, you're thinking of a different Atari. You're thinking of Atari Corporation, the Trammell company. And instead, you need to be thinking about this is Atari Games. This is the arcade division that just happens to have gotten into the console business. And they will remain very much a company that is always on the forefront of technology, be it later on with 3D games like hard driving and so forth. Even if their game designs aren't always the top, they will always have that one foot in the high-tech arena. Yeah. So, yeah, it was an idea. They're spitballing stuff, and at this point, they're making enough money, and they have the backing of Warner Brothers that a couple failed attempts at stuff really don't hurt them because they can afford to take those losses.
Want to move on?
Yeah, why not?
Because the hologram system is dead as it was this language is killing me, when it was released.
And it was never released, so it was just shown off at Toy Fair.
I was just shown it. Cancel before getting to market. Sorry, I was listening to you. I was just not paying attention. Anyhow, okay. Stern getting a preliminary injunction against Ferncrest Distributors, Inc.
Yes. This is one of many, many legal stories this month, and we probably should have actually had this together with the other legal stories, but well. So there's a lot of legal action going on, especially in the arcade business, which is still the booming area. So we got Stern going after Ferncrest because their game is a little too much like Astro Invader. Zygon is the game in question. Midway wins a recommended determination. This is a technical term, recommended determination, finding from an administrative law judge of the U.S. International Trade Commission protecting its rights to Galaxian, both as the name of a game and the game's mechanics. So what this does is it says that they have essentially, I'm simplifying a little bit, but a presumption of correctness in their assertion that they own, that a game is violating if somebody uses the name Galaxian on a title. And there had been a handheld game from a completely different manufacturer called Galaxian. And the handheld game played very much like Galaxian. So there was reasons for wanting to get this determination. And the game's mechanics, obviously, is what they're trying to protect. And like we said with Jawbreaker, even though the courts in the Sierra case, in the online systems case, didn't recognize the similarities between the games, the idea of starting to get protection for the game mechanics is going to be the key. Yeah.
It was really a time when those guys were ripping off other guys were just too lazy to somehow oh geez, I'm missing the word.
Hide the fact.
Thank you.
Well, it's not that they were too lazy to hide the fact. It's just you knew these guys had a hit. And the window for capitalizing on that hit was going to be very, very short. And they also, most of these guys, when they did have a hit, didn't have the production capacity to meet demand.
Okay.
So there was also a desire on the side of the operators to get more copies of these games than could be produced. And so these companies that are coming in saying, hey, we'll sell you 10 Galaxians. We may not be the official guys, but we also know Galaxian has maybe a 6-month shelf life before it's going to be replaced by the next hit. So while you're still waiting for your back-ordered official Galaxian game, you're missing out on all that coin drop.
Yeah.
So, and this is really one of these problems of the industry at this time, and it's going to continue to be a problem. I mean, all through the age of cartridges and arcade boards.
Yeah.
Because the turnover time necessary to be able to manufacture the units is very long, and because the units are so expensive and the profit margin is relatively small on the individual units, you can't afford to overproduce a product.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean, if you're making, let's say, a 10% profit, each unit that you don't sell is eating up the profit of 10 other units that you did sell. So if you have an overproduction of 20% and you have a 10% profit margin, you lost money on that game no matter how many units you sold.
Yeah.
And so this is why the production runs are relatively conservative. The longevity of the games is usually not long enough to really run up the production facilities a second time.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is where these pirates are coming in, and they're like, okay, we only produce after we know it's a hit. We don't have to do the big development cycles. We don't have to put out the advertising months and months in advance. We basically just pop it out and try to sell as long as the going is good.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
From a pirate's point of view.
Well, of course, from a pirate's point of view, it makes sense. Not that I have any experience in that area whatsoever. So, yeah. Okay.
Bottle of rum.
Let's move on to the world of computer game companies that are legit.
Let's move on. And I'm a butcher of the name. Zero Tech launches its first title.
As far as I can tell, that was correct.
Wonderful.
So, Galactic Attack, the first game released by Surotech, isn't going to go down as one of the all-time greats, but it is a humble beginning for the company that will soon revolutionize CRPGs with wizardry. And they're also going to change their name from Surotech to Surtech.
Mm-hmm. Sounds better.
Yes, definitely. Now, Zero was the last name of the one of the founders of the company. So.
Okay. And they kind of wanted to remove him from the company's name, but not really.
And it was just an issue that it sounded better, and especially after they got once they got into the CRPG business, then that made a lot more sense.
Totally. And I mean, Surtech. Well, sounds knightly.
Exactly, that's why. Yeah. And the history of Surtech was actually the topic on a very good episode of Alex Smith's podcast, They Create Worlds. We'll link to that in the show notes. Really, really impressive story of where the company originally came from, how it developed, and then also how it stopped developing.
Okay.
Well, it survived for years and years and years without actually making any games, but that's just because the Wizardry series becomes huge in Japan.
Yeah.
And they're not even making the games that are appearing in Japan; they're just making money off the licensing.
Oh.
Yeah, there's ancillary product. There's, I think there's even an anime and stuff. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, but I've actually never heard of Zero Tech. I haven't heard of Galactic Attack, and I think Wizardry is something you want to push me through in 7 minutes.
There's no way for you to even create a character in Wizardry in 7 minutes.
Wonderful. Those are the games I like the most. Jeez. Okay, so we might want to take 7 hours. Not that that'll become a concept of this podcast. Moving on, and my voice is breaking already. Time Zone will finally hit shelves.
Sierra's long-awaited mega adventure Time Zone will be coming on January 5th. The 5-disc game will sell for a whopping $99.95. The game would miss its release date, though, and slip to March of 1982.
You know what else I can almost get for $99.95?
A Discovery Channel?
Yep. Well, not the channel. Well,
the system.
That would
Discovery
the
system, yes.
yeah.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. Time Zone is a fairly legendary game because it's like it is the ultimate version of the original Sierra graphic adventures, and graphic adventure in the sense that it was text adventure with graphics added, with still graphics.
Okay.
And this was just supposed to be this massive game that was going to take forever to finish. I mean, virtually no game at this point is shipping on more than one disc.
Yeah.
This is why 5 discs, it's just this huge thing. There's a story about how a guy who was putting the graphics together ends up dying and stuff. The game is stuff. Well, I don't want to misquote it. I think he basically has a psychological breakdown and stuff. It's messed up. But the problem is the game kind of blows at the end. And you're supposed to be traveling through time, but the years don't match up, the events don't match up. It's not researched at all. It's basically just like a
cyberpunk. What?
No, it's like a 6-year-old's understanding of history. It's bad. It's very, very bad. And so they ship it. It doesn't do well, and it don't want to say it's the end of the Sierra graphic adventures, but yeah, that form of adventure game is kind of going to go by the wayside because Infocom is going to be very well established by then. We've talked about how Infocom has already announced Zork or is already selling Zork. And even though it doesn't have graphics, the quality of the adventure is going to be on such a different level that the allure of having some still images as you play won't be enough anymore.
Oh, well, I mean, Sierra should have just let it play in an alternate universe, and they were good to go with all the story, the history mistakes they've made. Well, should go to Marvel and talk to those guys. And in the meantime, moving on.
Well, Scott Adams is going to do that because Scott Adams is going to get the Marvel license and actually release graphic adventures using the Marvel characters very soon.
And yeah, I am thinking you've got nothing to add to that. Okay. I stand corrected. Still. Moving on, Sirius. Why so serious? Sirius becomes a corporation.
Software publisher Sirius Software has formally become a corporation. This will help it grow as it continues to publish amazing games, primarily for the Apple II, fueled by the genius of Nasir Gabaldi.
So, what kind of emotion do you expect me to get when I hear this topic, when I hear this headline?
Well, for one, Sirius is a legendary name, especially in the Apple II community. It's one of these first companies that really hits it big. Nasir Gabaldi is similar to Silas Warner, is like this genius programmer that is keeping the lights on at this early publisher.
Okay.
Even though they're releasing software from other people, everybody's coming for the Gabaldi games. just like everybody was going to Muse for the Warner games.
Okay.
And the fact that this company has already been releasing software, but is now becoming a proper corporation. Mm-hmm. And they will have an absolutely meteoric rise until the crash happens.
As always.
And that is what's going to kill them. But literally, they are going to be one of the biggest names in the industry for the next few years. And Gabaldi himself is going to become legendary because after Sirius collapses, he ends up picking up a gig programming in Japan, and he ends up working for this company, and they say, hey, we want to do this new type of game on the NES that hasn't been really done before, and can you pull it off for us? And he's like, sure, I can do this thing. And he ends up becoming the programmer for Final Fantasy.
Oh.
Yeah, minor thing.
You want to say that Nasir Gabaldi was big in Japan?
Yeah, that is definitely true. He is very big in Japan. I don't know if anybody in Japan knows his name because they were always hush-hush about console developers back in the day. But yeah, he makes his bones then over there. I mean, after, of course, becoming a legend on the Apple II.
See, my song reference was totally lost on you. Too bad.
I got the reference. I also know where the song reference comes from because I'm old enough to remember the phrase "big in Japan" before it was a song.
Oh.
Yeah, see, big in Japan was always this thing where it's like you could be a washed-up nobody in the U.S., but, you were selling great in Japan because a lot of artists would become these niche pop culture icons in Japan for whatever reason there, they hit it off. And so, yeah, that song about big in Japan was basically it's about this guy trying to impress a girl, and he's like, well, you may not have heard of me here, but I'm big in Japan.
And yet again, I've learned something that'll eat up way too much of my brain space.
Exactly, as it should. Yeah. There's also a great episode of Justice League Unlimited where Supergirl, for some reason, is huge in Japan, and it's kind of this cute little running gag.
Is Supergirl the one flying around in a skirt?
This
Moving
version,
on.
Yes, this version, yes.
This explains a lot. Moving on. SPI releases Dawn of the Dead board game. Don't tell me we have a board game topic.
We have a board game topic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's not computer or video game related, but the fact that there is a Dawn of the Dead board game, it was just too cool not to mention. So I had to mention it. There was a Dawn of the Dead board game. And yeah, I was just like, that's pretty cool.
You've ever played it?
No. I ran across it in an issue of Toy and Hobby World.
Okay.
And then I looked it up online. The board is basically a large checkerboard with the layout of the shopping mall on it. Have you ever seen the movie Dawn of the Dead? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Okay. Now there's two versions of it. There's a remake from the 2000s, and then there's the original George Romero movie.
Okay.
And it's sort of a spiritual sequel to Night of the Living Dead.
Oh, of course.
So this is why Night of the Living Dead, then Dawn of the Dead. Then he also does Day of the Dead and a bunch of other movies. But the George Romero zombie movies are always about, they're not really about the zombies. They're always social critiques of some kind.
Oh.
And that's why Night of the Living Dead has layer upon layer of significance if you really watch it properly.
So it's a pretty lively movie, you want to say?
Oh, Jesus Christ. Yeah. No, but if you haven't watched Dawn of the Dead, as soon as COVID's over, dude, we can make that a movie night movie. Because Dawn of the Dead is awesome. And it's about a zombie apocalypse and this small group of people who find refuge in a shopping mall.
Okay.
And it's sort of a critique of consumerism and people falling into this fake security and sense of everything's all right as long as I have my consumer goods.
Okay.
And they're just living in this mall while the zombies are piling up outside and stuff. And it's a good movie. It's a very, very good movie. It was also the inspiration for Ubisoft's first title, Zombie, which is essentially an RPG in that same scenario, only without the license. But this is a licensed board game that came out. There's a link to a review of it on BoardGameGeek.com. Probably not the greatest game, especially by modern standards. People were much more, how can I say, they were much more likely to accept some arcane rule sets and stuff back in the day. But, yeah, it just seemed like a fun thing to end the show on. And yes, this is the end of the show.
Not bad.
No,
yeah, sorry, my Skype just interrupted for the last 5 seconds, and
No, you didn't miss anything. I was just saying it's the end of the show.
Yeah, this is when I returned, and I was like, okay.
Cool. So, any final thoughts?
There's one more thing.
And that would be?
Word of the day.
Well, since we talked a lot about legal problems today, let's make it legal. A legal word.
Yes.
So let's do lawsuit. Okay, so wait, what was the word that you wanted to suggest?
Preliminary injunction.
Preliminary injunction. I like it. Okay, preliminary injunction it is.
Yes, and we have to close this episode quickly before I'm cut off again. So
remember, everybody, check us out on Patreon. Check us out on YouTube. Leave us some likes, subscribe, do whatever you can to help spread the word of the show. Okay. If you like one of our tweets, retweet it. That'll help. Yeah. Get it out there. And, we'll see you back here next week when we jump to February of 1991. Okay, remember, everybody, have fun.
Bye.